call this special meeting of the City Council to order. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Payne.
Present.
Councilmember Hewer.
Here.
Councilmember Campion.
Here.
Councilmember Powers. Here. Mayor Cruz.
Here. Okay, public comment, please.
Under Government Code Section 54954.3, members of the public may address the council on any agenda item before or during the consideration of the item. Speakers shall restrict their comments to a maximum of 5 minutes. Please fill out a speaker sheet located on the table inside the entrances to the council chambers and forward the completed speaker sheet to the city clerk.
Very good. This meeting being a budget meeting for the City of Galt, we will now turn it over to the City Manager, Mr. Palazzo.
Do public comment first?
We can go with public comment, yes. Terry Carson?
You get to stand behind something, Gary.
I'm Terry Carson. I'm the president on the chamber this year, and they asked me to come talk about our special events that we have, the Strawberry Festival, the Egg Extravaganza, and all that stuff we do. And I guess you all waive our fees for doing these events. So and you're talking about budget. So, but when we do these events, you know, it brings other people into the community. The vendors charge sales tax, so we get sales tax base. It brings people down to the old part to see, you know, Brewster's, Garcetti's, Sandwich Place, the Cupcake Place, Bonz's, and it's educational. Teach a lot of stuff. Not public speaking, not being one of them. Any questions?
None.
No questions? Anyway, is that good?
Yeah. Okay. Terry, thank you for giving your input. That's part of what this meeting is about, is to get public input, and thank you.
Thank you.
We have no further public speakers.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Gene Palazzo, City Manager, and thank you for having this meeting today to talk about budget. It's one of my second most favorite things to talk about. The first is strategic planning, and you know, kind of looking at the big picture. And the council and staff have gone through our strategic plan process and take a look at kind of the big policy view of where we want to go with our city. Budget gives us an opportunity to, you know, put dollars to those strategic plan items. And today we have several budget slides to go through, and we're kind of working on these slides up till this morning. I want to thank Emily and her staff for putting all this together for us, and then also the directors and their staffs for the past several months and you know, going through the budget and trying to, you know, put our budgets together. So today, what I'd like to do is kind of take a look at the 5,000-foot level, high view picture of our budget and kind of where we're at, and my view as your city manager for the last about 3 months now on I think where we're at. The budget, the process. And the numbers, there's a lot of numbers in these slides, but these numbers are not, you know, the actual, you know, expenditure numbers. After today's meeting, we'll be finalizing our budget, and we'll get that to the City Council. Our target date for that is May 24th, so you have about 2 weeks before our June 7th meeting. And so we can kind of walk you through, if we need to meet individually and walk through the budget, we can do that. And then we'll present that line item budget to the City Council on June 7th. At that meeting, we'll also talk, I believe we'll have the CIP, capital improvement program budget as well. So today, it's the big overview, and, as I'm going through the budget and taking a look, there's some things, that, I want to make sure, that the council doesn't have any surprises. And as I work with my staff and do budgets, I'm pretty direct. I don't like surprises. I like to keep it simple, and I like to keep it transparent. The process this year, staff, everybody was involved. We had several meetings, several hours of meetings going through these budgets together. And I think that staff has a real good, handle on, everybody's budget at this time. And we sat in meetings discussing what our priorities are. Because there's always, like you go back to your home budget, I'm assuming everybody here in the audience has a budget that you do for your home, and you take a look at your priorities, and you decide, hey, mortgage is pretty important, and you need to pay that mortgage. We got electricity and gas and the services, sewer and water and garbage that we need to pay for, so you budget for that. Then you start budgeting for food. And then, down at the bottom of the budget, you say, oh, needs some entertainment. We're going to go out to eat. Maybe we take a vacation. And you go through a mental process in your mind on how you're going to spend your money that's coming in for the year. And that's the process that we went through with the city. There's kind of a finite resources that we have in general fund. It's transaction tax, sales tax, property tax, building permits, other things that we receive our money from. But we have a lot of expenses and a lot of things that you're going to find as we talk through the budget this evening that we deferred or have been deferring. Get some equipment, vehicles, building maintenance, and we're in a very deep recession. A lot of cities in California, probably about most cities in California, had to do a lot of deferrals, and we looked at what our most valuable resource is, and that's our employees. Let's continue the operation and provide those services to our employees. And cities, are formed because we provide services. And just like your house, cities have that hierarchical, how do we spend our money? Typically, it's police. Cities are formed, and the people expect, good, police services and security. You got streets, you got drainage, you got, those public safety items that you're going to find in your budget that, we need to, take a look at priorities. You got all those support services that support, those functions. And as you go down through the list and you start taking a look at, some of the things that, communities like to provide, or cities like to provide the community, that are benefits to the community, the things that build community, things that I like, that say, hey, we are a community, and that's your parks, your trails, your recreation programs. But there are things that, come on that list that, we need to take a look at and say, do we have adequate funds to meet those priorities first, and then how do we, manage? And as we go through that, there's always ways, how do we increase our revenues? How do we be more efficient with our expenses? And so this budget process that, we went through this evening, or that staff has gone through in the last couple of months, has, we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, as your, city manager. So, tonight we're going to talk about a lot of those items. Business-minded, and I always look at cities, we're business, you're the board of directors, the city council, CEO, superintendent, city manager, it's said differently in various forms. You have your directors, you guys are the policy makers. We're here tonight to, get some policy decisions from you. We have a few items or 2 slides in here that, we're going to talk about, some direction. We make some staff recommendations. Then we're going to talk about lining our budget up and how it lines up with our strategic plan. I think I had covered both of those slides. The discussion topics this evening, we're going to walk you through the personnel costs, general fund, all the expenditures, what's included, what's not included. We went through a process. When I sat down with the directors, I asked for a status quo budget, but I want to see what is it that, we need. What are the vehicles that we need? What are the employee, staff positions that we need to really operate efficiently? And there's a lot of things that, we had to go through and not fund this year because we just don't have the revenue to do that. But I know the needs are there, and we have to balance our priorities, based on those needs, and we'll walk the council through, those items. Talk about our final general fund balance. We'll get into our parks and recreation. Ask for some, council direction on that, and then we'd like to talk about lighting landscape districts. You'll see sewer and water. They're not up here. Those funds are status quo, kind of balanced. You shouldn't expect any real significant changes in those budgets as we move forward. The next slide here, this is kind of our doom and gloom slide. The overall personnel costs have increased. There's positions that we're not able to fund, but there is some good news in our budget as well. You're going to see our revenues are going up. Unfortunately, our expenses are increasing quicker than our revenues are going up, and then Ms. Boyd's going to walk us through that with the slides. So I thank you for your time today, and I know budgets are difficult. We have a difficult time trying to, kind of go through those numbers, presenting them in a manner, so it's understandable. I think Emily's done a very good job with her staff in doing that this evening. And what I'd just like to do is turn this over to Ms. Boyd and have her walk you through a few of these slides. We're going to probably do a little tag, through some of the slides. There's a few slides that I'll, have some comments on. So, Boyd, any questions?
Oh. Afternoon, Mayor Cruz, members of the City Council. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and be able to present this item to you. When I get into the numbers or any of the details, I'd like to thank the staff. We have an excellent finance department staff, starting with Michelle Neely, who is our budget go-to person. She has quite a mastery of it. Matt Boyd, who is our personnel budget cost individual. I also like to thank Greg Lucido, who is not here this afternoon, because this is the first day of our interim field work for our external audit, and we need him to be there for the auditors. So he has that priority today rather than this one. I also wanted to thank the directors. We had numerous budget meetings while we were developing the line items. We had numerous budget meetings where we were talking about globally where the city is at. Without their input and their advice and their counsel, particularly from people that have been here for a number of years, I don't think I could have, in 2.5 months, gotten quite a handle that I feel I do have now on the city's budget. Not talking today, we're not asking you to approve numbers. What we're asking you today is take a look at some of the numbers that I'm going to present. I'm going to talk to you about the structural plan of the city, and then I'm going to ask you for some policy direction. When we come back to you on June 7th, that's when we're going to ask you to approve numbers. And I believe Mr. Palazzo mentioned it, but we are going to give you the budget document 2 weeks before June 7th for your review. And I urge you during that 2-week period of time, if you have any questions about it, please talk to Mr. Palazzo or myself, and we'll try to answer them for you. So what we're trying to do tonight is set it up so that we can put in place some really needed fiscal management policies and analysis and evaluation that will help the city, aid the city as it moves forward for long-term planning. This is not just about the fiscal 17 and fiscal 18 budget. So I want to also thank Kathy Burris, my administrative assistant, who put together the color slides in this PowerPoint presentation. Had a lot of fun doing it. This is the city staff. As you know, they provide excellent service to the public with a can-do attitude. So we're going to get into some numbers, and these might be kind of weighty, but I ask you to bear with me. I'm going to try and go through them slowly. First thing that we need to look at is in personnel, and the reason I put personnel cost as the first chapter, if you will, in this PowerPoint, is that it is the #1 expenditure of the city, is for personnel. And the thing that we need to understand about personnel costs is that they continue to rise. We don't have a whole lot of control over them. We have some, but not complete control. So here we're looking at the CalPERS rates. Now we have 4 retirement plans. If anyone doesn't know, CalPERS is the California Public Employees Retirement System. And the city has 4 plans. There are 2 classic plans and 2 PEPRA plans. The classic plans are the safety plan and the miscellaneous plan. Miscellaneous, everybody that's not safety. PEPRA is the Public Employees Pension Reform Act, which was passed in 2013, and it was designed to reduce some of the costs of retirement benefits. And it will begin doing that. However, this city and every other city in California is not likely to see a great impact downward in your costs until probably 2024 or 2026. In the meantime, let's look at the classic. See the miscellaneous rate every year? That percentage is the percentage of gross wages, and that's the amount that the city is required to contribute to the PERS system. Up through 17, we've also included the 5% employer-paid employee contributions that the city had been making. Based upon employee negotiations and new MOUs, beginning in fiscal 18 in the miscellaneous group, the employees will be paying that 5%, not the city. So you see in fiscal 18 that percentage rate goes down a tip. It doesn't go down a whole 5% because there was an increase included in there as well. An increase in the, it's called the nominal rate, that percentage of gross wages that you have to contribute. Safety, CalPERS has done an interesting thing just recently with the safety plans, not just here at Galt, but throughout the state. They've decided to level off that nominal rate, which is that percentage rate of gross pay that we have to contribute. They leveled that off at 19.5%, and in our actuarial study, they project out through 2021, and through that period of time, it's still 19.5%. However, and you'll see there, if you look at fiscal 15, that percentage was 38.51, and then in fiscal 16, it cut a little bit more than in half to 18.52. What they did is instead of charging the 38 or 40% in the nominal rate, is they assessed to each city an assessment for an unfunded liability lump sum payment. So in fiscal 16, the city was required to pay $503,000 as a lump sum payment, and if we paid it at the beginning of the year, we get some cash discount on that. Not substantial, but we take advantage of that. So moving forward, when we look at this budget, that unfunded liability amount is going to go up every year. And when I looked at the actuarial studies, I look at up through 2020 and 2021, that $619,000 that's there as the unfunded liability for fiscal 18, that amount in 2021 goes up to $843,000. So the point that I wanted to get across with this slide is that personnel costs continue to rise, and we don't have a whole lot of control over it. We did have some control over what the employees paid versus what the employer paid, but we've already rectified that, so there's not much else we can do. We put this in a line chart just so you could see where it's going. From 2006 all the way up to 2017, you see that number, that line just keeps going up, 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 up. You have that small downtick in fiscal 18, which is related to the employees now paying that additional 5% rather than the city paying it. Workers' comp.
Excuse me, before you go on, just a question on the unfunded liability.
Yes.
Like you showed that in 16 for the first year, $503,000, and I understand that was. Is that the actual amount between the 38% and the 18%, or what's the relationship there?
The relationship is determined through an actuarial study, and I would say it's not a dollar for dollar amount. I'd be happy to share that actuarial study with you if you'd like. It's extremely complicated and probably beyond the scope of this meeting, but I'd be happy to get that actual study out to you guys if you'd like it.
So what they're taking is that difference and projecting it out over, what, a 20-year period, or what period of time are they using for the leveling?
Well, I'm not sure that I'd necessarily call it leveling, but it is projected out over a period of time, correct. I haven't read the study lately. I looked at the sum numbers, and I'd be happy to get back to you on that with more detail if you're interested.
If you would.
I will. I'll be
Okay,
happy
thank
to.
you.
We're on workers' comp. So workers' comp rates are also increasing. We've provided you with a line graph that goes from 2006 through 2018. 16 is an estimated number. Fiscal 17 and 18 are budgeted projections. Those numbers for 17 and 18 come from the JPA that the city is a member of. I believe it's NCCSIF. Did I get that acronym right? Yeah. They provide us every year, right about this time of year, they have conduct a board meeting, and they tell us how much our premium is going to be for the next year. And you see that this number is going up as well. There are several reasons that are causing this number to rise. One is due to claims experience. Another reason is that workers' comp is tied to wages. It's a percentage of wages. So if wages go up, your workers' comp premium is going to go up. Additionally, we've had a modification on confidence level. That's the amount of reserves that the JPA holds for us against future claims. So you see this number is going up as well. We have, perhaps we could argue that we have more control over this number than we do over CalPERS, but not a lot. So then what I'd like to do is move into new positions and bounce this back to Mr. Palazzo to talk about.
Yeah, and now stay seated, I guess, and I got
I'll be over here somewhere.
Okay, sounds good. We got a couple of slides here on positions and funding requests. You know, as we went through, you know, with the directors, we talked about, you know, what is it that we need? How do we basically grow our business, or as our business grows, what positions? And, you know, going through what we can afford. And the first slide that you see up there is the new positions that we're going to recommend for this year, and I can briefly kind of go through the reasonings, you know, why on each of those positions. You know, the parking enforcement, that's funded through the general fund, but it should be reimbursable based on the abandoned vehicle program through the county. The engineering assistant, we have several projects, you know, the sewer and water, and also the, you know, some of the subdivision projects that we have moving forward and needing the additional assistance within the Public Works Department. IT, you're going to, you know, hear that quite a bit. You know, a lot of our discussion with staff is that, you know, we've kicked the can in our IT department for many, many years, and we have a lot of deferred maintenance with our systems, and you're going to see what's in the budget as one-time capital projects. A lot of it is focused on our information technology. We're coming to a point where if we don't do something, then we're going to have some serious problems in how we operate. And everything we do is related to IT, from our desks to you know, all of our systems, interconnectivity with all of our buildings and departments. So, you know, getting an additional analyst on board, you know, to assist with that is imperative, you know, to continue our operations. The project management specialists, the temporary analysts, and the police dispatcher are Measure R funded. The project specialist would take part-time positions of full-time. The temporary analyst is a continuation of an existing position, but it needs to, Measure R expenditure plan needs to come back to the council. And then the analyst, the police dispatcher takes a part-time to a full-time. And the utilities maintenance supervisor, you know, brings to our sewer treatment facility, you know, that expertise and knowledge that, you know, kind of a gap that we don't have you know, as our new plant, you know, kind of comes online and the improvements are completed. The next slide, you know, position. Go ahead.
If I could ask a question before you
Absolutely.
move on. Currently, that temporary parking enforcement, is that done by CAPS or how is that? Who's
Chief
doing
respond to
that?
that.
It's partially done by CAPS, and then it's also done by our crime prevention specialist.
And CAPS is not, they don't get a salary, right?
Correct.
So
Volunteers.
are you proposing to hire someone on a temporary basis to replace what CAPS is doing, or?
Both with CAPS and with the position that our crime prevention specialist is doing, so the crime prevention specialist can get back to focusing on the crime prevention
Instead of marking tires?
Correct.
And part of this is, you know, there's, you know, reimbursable funding provided through the abandoned vehicle program, you know, through the county, and that money's sitting there not being reimbursed back, you know, to us as a city. You know, so, you know, the strategy is pulling on a part-time position, you know, or temporary, you know, position, you know, to start addressing those needs and getting that reimbursed through this program.
And everybody here knows I'm totally ignorant when it comes to computers and IT. So I'm wondering, would we get more detail as to what the IT analyst will be doing? And are we talking about a person? Are we talking about equipment?
The analyst will be a
Will we get
full-time.
a breakdown on
Yeah, and currently, right now, you know, what we have is we have two, you know, people in the IT department. We have, you know, Matt and Mike. My name's right. Mike. And we did have a temporary person that was working through a company which since left. And so, you know, we've, you know, gone through, you know, a pretty rigorous process with our directors and taking a look at an IT, you know, plan. And they've met a handful of times, you know, several hours at a time, looking at the priorities and putting kind of a plan in place on what our priorities are for IT. And you're going to see, you know, a lot of that equipment needed later on here in the budget. A lot of that equipment involves computers, replacement of computers, or fleet of computers is aging, probably outlived its useful life. A lot of them are still, you know, working, but, you know, at any time they're going to, you know, not work. Like vehicles, like you know, anything that we do, we should have a replacement program. And so we're putting together a replacement program in this budget. We have a lot of computer replacements. Our servers, we have several servers that are 7, 8, 9 years old. A server life is about 5 years. And, you know, as an operation, I look at that as a city manager, we can't operate like that. You know, if we don't replace these servers, you know, we're going to, you know, have a failure that's going to be, you know, disastrous in the way we operate and provide our services to the city. So the IT specialist, analyst is going to assist in trying to, you know, put all these, you know, equipment programs in place, you know, for that department.
So is that a new full-time
It would be a
position?
new full-time position.
Okay.
And then the request was 2 analysts. I only, you know, I'm recommending 1. You'll see on the next page there's another analyst position that we're not going to hire. We're going to, you know, kind of move forward with just a you know, 3-department or 3-division staff there to implement this.
Did we consider bringing in just a temporary person to cover the new
Yeah,
merchandise or the
yeah, we have, you know, we do have a volunteer that comes in and helps us out at times, but, you know, the needed work available requires a full-time, you know, position.
Okay, thank you.
The next are our positions. Project management specialist, I assume for the police department. What is a project management specialist?
Chief?
That's the person that's currently sitting in our professional standards, does internal affairs, training and recruitment.
So it's a police officer, is it?
It's a civilian position, it's not a
Civilian
police officer
position?
position. Correct.
Okay, and the temporary analyst?
That's the position that we have that we brought in for doing some of the analysis work and the research on different areas in the department, such as the property and evidence, our dispatch center area. They're working a lot with that right now. They're going to be doing some work to try to help us with some of the auditing in the department to find out where our shortcomings are.
That's also a civilian position.
Correct.
And you'll notice on the next slide, I know Councilmember Campion had a question, but the next slide, we have a police sergeant's position that's not filled. That's, been in the budget but vacant for a couple of years now. And as we're going through the budget, trying to balance priorities and what is it that we need, and working with departments, one of the things that Chief and I, discussed is, how do we best, kind of, grow the department, provide those services, and, save the costs. And so the, positions that are recommended is, kind of the direction that we decided to go at this point. At a later time, as our revenues, increase, we'll come back and revisit, some of those positions, such as the sergeant position.
Back on the prior slide, on the temporary parking enforcement, I know that you plan to fund that through the abandoned vehicle program through STA, or I'm assuming STA, is that correct?
I believe that's the source.
Yes, okay, yes. In that, the program that we have set up here, obviously that's been vetted through STA, and they are on board with that because it's for abandoned vehicles primarily, not for parking enforcement. So I don't see how we would be fully funding that position for a parking program when these, the intended purpose
I think
was
it's
abandoned
the wording
vehicles.
thing. It's the abandoned vehicle program, so maybe we need to, I don't know if it's a position wording in the budget, but the function would be focusing on abandoned vehicles. It would be.
Right, the function is abandoned vehicle abatement. But to the point that Barbara brought up earlier, if we're having individuals reserved who are volunteers and doing this function, we're unable to claim any cost reimbursement from the program. I believe we call this parking enforcement, and Paula can weigh in on this because that is a previously approved job description, job title classification that we have. I think if we call it abandoned vehicle enforcement, we may need to create a new class or a new job description.
Well, what I'm saying is, if you were to look at it, it doesn't line up with the funding source. If you're calling it parking enforcement, and it's actually abandoned vehicle as the funding source.
Yes, I understand that, and it's a good point that you bring up, and it's a discussion point that we've had in numerous meetings amongst staff regarding whether or not this position would be fully recoverable. At the end of the day, we felt that probably it could be. I know the chief can weigh in on that if he would like to.
The piece on the, when they're going to do the abandoned vehicles, we can bill it towards that fund site. I think that by giving them the abandoned vehicle title, it also limits them somewhat if we ever were to need them for something else. But we don't know if we're going to need them for something else, but right now the plan is to use them solely for the abandoned vehicle program. It's a temporary hire. We're going to hire one, hopefully, and bring them on, and then see if we need any additional. But it's about 15 hours a week that we're looking at bringing somebody on specifically for that duty.
And I think it's a good idea. I just want to make sure that, we don't get down the road and have to do reimbursement because the funds were improperly used for parking enforcement, because parking enforcement sounds like you're going to be over at the flea market. And I don't know that that's an appropriate use of the abandoned vehicle funds.
Sounds like me in our budget meetings.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, but in order for it to be declared an abandoned vehicle, there has to be a parking violation to start, correct? In other words, somebody has to report a vehicle that's sitting on the side of the road, been there more than 72 hours, something to that effect, if I remember correctly.
Most of the ways we go and deal with abandoned vehicles right now is because of a complaint from a citizen. Then we have to go out and tag it for 72 hours, just like the mayor said. And then if it hasn't been moved or identified, or we can't talk to the registered owner, then we can tow it. There's also other things, if it's registration's over 6 months old, it can be deemed abandoned. There's a whole bunch of other things, but the
But it
mayor
starts
is
with the
right.
park.
Most of it is due to citizen complaints.
But it starts with a parked vehicle.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that slide?
Yeah, on the engineering assistant, says that the cost will be recovered through the abatement process. What fund sources would that be?
And then mainly sewer and water. Steve, you wanna-
Yeah, probably 80 to 90%, even though it's a general fund position. All of our engineering positions live in the general fund.
Right.
And then cost abate to water, sewer, streets, storm drain, lighting, landscape districts, and this would be similar. Probably primarily in the initial years, water and wastewater is where we've got some big capital projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Can we go back to the workman's comp slide? We could like stop the discussion before we move so quickly.
Sure.
So, between 2015 and 2017, the cost increase was over 100,000, 140,000,
But that, okay.
correct? Okay.
The number listed there, the 112, is just 17 to 16, but you're looking at 17 to 15? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, like 15, so in 2 years, that we went up over 140,000 or so. Okay. Do we anticipate costs continuing to go up like that?
The costs that we have right now, that as approved by the JPA for fiscal 17, are what they're going to charge us for 17, and we increased to 18 by 5%. They have not given us the 18 rates yet. I'm not a member of that board, so I can't really speculate on future costs. I wonder if we could ask Paula or Steve Rudolph to weigh in on that.
The things that are within our control that I do know is that with the workers' comp claim, they look back 5 years, and we have just closed out a couple of really large claims. So in that respect, it should be looking better for the city of Galt, because our individual claims have closed. So, but again, there's a little bit of a delay, and we probably won't see that until like a year or two down the road.
So it is the claims, probably. I mean, she was talking about salary increases, but this doesn't really appear to be mostly caused from salary increases. This really is caused from claims.
It's kind of a combination of a lot of things, and increased medical costs. But I know that a portion of, we can't control like medical costs and that sort of thing, but I do know the claims, our large claims, there are a couple that closed out this year that we will get some relief from going forward.
With those claims, does it put us at a higher rate as a city?
Pardon me?
With those claims that you just talked about, that's going to put us at a higher rate as a city, so.
They have. The larger claims affect our rates, definitely, but now that we've closed them out and we no longer have them, that's going to impact our rates in the future.
Okay, it will in the future. It will continue to go up, even in the future. It's not like we are past that.
Because of those claims closing, we will see a reduction in the cost because of that.
Okay.
But then again, you know, we have other claims, you know, always happening, but most of our claims aren't really large. They're usually on the smaller side, but the larger ones, a couple of them did close. So again, that will benefit us in the next couple of years going forward.
Thank you. Does that answer the workers' comp? Do you want anything else? I think we were on positions needed but not included. Correct me if I'm on the wrong slide.
I'll go over that briefly. The planning and building, positions on this slide, we're looking at, they're not in the budget, but come mid-year, we'll have to review and take a look at that and see where our permits and our economy is at. A lot of the projections, with our revenue and, the need for these positions are based on development. Where is development going to be? We kind of anticipate the Eastview development that was just approved by the city council, starting to be under construction, probably in 18, summer of 18. It'll take them a year to get annexed and then get the infrastructure in play. That's where Public Works will, be reviewing the plans and getting the infrastructure in place. Year after that, should be the development opportunities. So we're gonna keep an eye on that, evaluate it at mid-year to see where we're at. If economics change and we get a lot of development coming in, then I might be back to the council asking for a couple of those positions. We talked about the IT analyst and the police sergeant, the engineering. Again, these positions are, anticipated needing funding in 17 and 18, and we'll continue to look at that. Building maintenance and parks workers, really there's a need. We have, and you'll see later on in these slides, a lot of deferred maintenance costs on our buildings, and we'll get into, how we're trying to, tackle that and fund those items. And then our parks workers or our workers in the streets, there's just, a lot of out there to do. At this point, we need to kind of hold on. Part of what I didn't talk about when I introduced the budget this evening is, we're kind of in that mode of, our costs are going up, our economy is increasing, but our costs are kind of increasing quicker than our economy is going. As development starts coming in, we get some commercial development, hopefully in about 2 to 3 years, those things will turn around. What we're going to be asking this evening, and our action items, and we talked about this in our strategic plan, is kind of put those plans in place. What is it that we need, to, be sustainable and efficient to cover these costs, going into the future. Right now, we just have to, kind of, hold on tight so we can manage our budget, in a, I guess, a good manner here as we move forward.
Typically, building departments are pretty well self-sustaining through their permit fee collection. And I'm just curious, you have a permit specialist, and then you have a building inspector. Is that I guess what's more difficult here is not understanding what the department looks like. In the past, we had a breakdown of personnel by department, and those that are new and those that are proposed. Do we have?
That'll be in the budget document, the organizational charts. This, is what we're anticipating that we'll probably need in a year and a half or so from now as development, continues to occur.
I know that the city was advertising for an building inspector position recently. Is that this position or
No,
a
that
new
is not.
position?
That is a new position. That is not this position.
Okay.
And we can have those charts, and the organizational charts will be in the budget document that you'll get on May 24th.
Getting back to the building department, so I know that in the past, some departments have looked at the building department. You take a 3 to 5 year projection, look at what the anticipated needs are, and they will make adjustments in their fee schedules. Has that been considered?
We talked about, actually have Emily address that on our fee schedules.
The city adopted an update to the fee schedule last fall, and we anticipate bringing it back in accordance with what was proposed to be done at that time. And a year later, we'll bring it back to you with a CPI adjustment. Those fees as proposed and adopted in 2015 were based upon a study. And so I'm assuming that because that study was done, that those very items that you're concerned about were in fact looked at in that study. What is the cost of providing the service?
I don't know that did council see the study?
I believe it was attached to, and we can verify this, but I believe it was attached to the document that was approved last, I believe it was in late August or early September, that revised the fee schedule.
And we bring that fee schedule back to the council annually?
We'll bring it back to you annually with a proposed CPI adjustment, as was talked about in the staff report at the time that was adopted.
Yeah, I recall the CPI, but I don't remember any special studies. Maybe we did, I just don't recall.
We can bring all that back in August, kind of get through the budget and then bring back the fee schedule. 'Cause that is one of the items that, we need to keep, track of and make sure our fees are adequate for, what we're doing and charging, so.
Fees in this area definitely need to line up with what the cost of the service is.
Services,
So
correct.
that would be what the study would have looked at.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions on that slide?
So this next slide is personnel costs citywide, and what we've done is we've summed up the total personnel in all of the funds of the city. And this includes the utility funds as well as the general fund and parks and recreation and everything else. And the purpose of this slide is to help you get a feel for how personnel costs are increasing. So we have our actual costs from fiscal 15, and we've categorized it just by salaries and wages and then a benefits line. And so in 15, our total cost, and then when we say actual, we mean that is what we actually paid out. In 16, when fiscal 15-16, we call that column estimated. That is what we're estimating the total to be by the time we get to June 30 of this year. And that is $16.1 million. Fiscal 17 and fiscal 18 are proposed amounts based upon our analysis of what our personnel costs are going to be. We look at all the positions we have. If we have positions where somebody may become eligible for a step increase, we budget for that in the event they are able to achieve that increase, so we have the money available. If we have vacant positions, we budget for those. Vacant and approved positions, we're budgeting for those. And those we have to budget a little bit higher than we might budget if the position was filled, depending on who's in the position, because we need to be able to budget to the maximum of whatever benefits are allowed, so that if we hire somebody who's eligible for all of that, we have sufficient budget for it. You'll see in the benefits between fiscal 17 and fiscal 18, you'll see a slight downtick there, and that's the net effect of the increases in workers' comp and safety PERS, netted out against the decrease of the city's obligation for the miscellaneous PERS, where the employees are once again taking over part of that payment. Also in fiscal 17 and in fiscal 18, there are COLA numbers in there. Additionally, the thing that you'll see in salaries and wages is that minimum wage was increased by the state legislature. We put in increases for fiscal 17 and fiscal 18. And in another slide, when we get down to Parks and Recreation, we're going to talk about, and I'll just give you a little preview on it, we're going to talk about how if we increase minimum wage, what we are going to do, and we don't have a choice, the legislature said we had to, what's going to happen is we may run into what's called compaction issues, where we may run into a situation where you have a supervisor who will now be making less than somebody they supervise because the supervisor is on a pay step schedule that has been adopted by the council, and the individual who they're supervising is being paid minimum wage, and their minimum wage may have caused them to be paid more than the person who's supervising them. We have not tried to calculate the impact from compaction because we don't have, for one thing, we don't have authority to change those pay schedules. That's your authority, not ours. And for another thing, we are, I think we've mentioned this before to the council, we're in the process of taking a look at a class and comp study. And when we get into that class and comp study, that will have some bearing upon how we want to fix or correct the compaction issue. We don't have to correct it right away, but we do need to correct it within the next, I would say, 6 to 12 months. So just to bear in mind that that's something hanging out there on the horizon that we'll need to look at. So what we did here is we calculated the change over fiscal year 15, the change for fiscal 17 and fiscal 18. And we did it two ways. We calculated it with the total personnel costs, and then we calculated it again by subtracting out the new position funding request. So you can see what the difference between the two would be in the impact. So with all of the new positions in, fiscal 17 is an increase over 16 of 10%. Fiscal 18 is an increase of 13%. If we back out those new position funding requests, fiscal 17 is an increase over 16 of 7%, and 18 is an increase over 16 of 10%. So there is a slight difference. The impact of these new funding requests is about 3%. So do you have any questions on this slide?
I don't have any questions on the slide, but I'm curious, you know, we close the city hall on Fridays. Do we know how much effect that has on our costs?
I don't know if the city has ever done that analysis, but we've certainly take a look at it if you're interested. Remember that we're closed on Fridays, however, staff is only off every other Friday. And so staff is still here working, so we're still paying them. And we're still paying staff, 80 hours in a pay period, whether or not we're off on the Fridays. It's not like we're only now having to pay them 72 hours instead of 80. We're still paying them 80 hours. They're just working a different schedule.
I just know that when this originated, it was because we were in a recession and we were trying to save personnel costs. But, and also closing the buildings was
Right.
gonna save,
Yeah.
utilities, et cetera.
Many cities did that in the middle of the recession where they went on furloughs. And in case, what we found, the finance community found, was that we went on furloughs and we reduced people's pay to 72 hours as opposed to 80, for instance. But what we found is that they're just working overtime on the other days because we did not reduce also their workload. So overall, I think most cities found that the furlough model wasn't really that effective in reducing costs overall. And so many of them, as soon as they had cash flow sufficient, they went off of it. And I wasn't here in Galt, and I haven't researched the history on that. Maybe someone here on the council who was here at that time could, lend more information. But certainly, if you have the building closed one day, theoretically, you're not paying for the utilities on that day. Okay, so let's go to the general fund. We put a picture of the police department up there for our cover sheet on general fund. Police and safety is often thought of, as Jane alluded to earlier, as one of the #1 priorities of a government is to provide safety to its residents. So let's talk about good news. Because I've just been hitting you up with this is going up and that's going up and the other thing is going up. So let's talk about something that's also going up marginally, but is good news, and that is our general fund tax revenue base is increasing. We have 4 primary sources of tax revenue in the general fund, and I'm going to go through each one of those slides here in a minute and talk about each source. But the thing that, 2 things that I want to point out on this slide is that fiscal 15 was 6.8, fiscal 16 is 7.9, and that increase is due to 2 things. Part of it is property taxes went up, and part of it is that sales taxes in fiscal 16 have gone up. You'll see that sales taxes then go back down in 17 and 18. Sales, and when we get to that slide, you'll see it graphically as well. Sales tax really didn't have a spike in that year. What we had was an accounting methodology change, and you can see it better when we get to the line graph. TOT and franchise taxes, the other 2.
I do have a question on that last slide. How is that transit occupancy tax set?
It is, well, at this point, it's a report that each one of the hotels collect the tax, and then they remit it to the city. One of our hotels is remitting quarterly. They're filing a quarterly tax return with their payment, and the other one is filing monthly. And our goal is to get both of them on a monthly program. So it's a voluntary report. They collect it and remit it to us.
No, my question was the rate itself. How is that?
Is it 10%? The rate is set via council ordinance, or is it
The 10% TOT, and that's done through ordinance believed by the vote of the people. When if you want to raise the transaction tax, it wouldn't go to a vote.
That goes to is it general?
The general fund, it's a general fund tax, so I'm going to turn over to.
It is a general tax, so it would have to go to the voters to increase it. It requires a majority vote in order to increase. It's usually not as controversial as sent to your voters because of the fact that they're not imposing it on themselves.
Right.
Did charter cities have the opportunity to set that themselves? Because I had heard there had been cities that had actually set their own TO tax.
Without going to the vote?
Yes.
I don't think that's the case. I think they do go to the voters, but I'll check on
I
that.
was just curious.
Okay, so property taxes. You can see graphically here where we did the line chart from 2006 through 2018. You can see where everything fell off there during the recession. You can see that we've had a steady increase ever since. We feel that that uptick is due to assessed valuations returning, coming back up a bit. And also, we believe there's been some reinvigorated development, more stock coming online. Sales and use tax. Here you can see that little uptick, downtick there where I was talking about an accounting methodology change. The green arrow line shows that, you know, if you take that anomaly out, basically our sales tax has been increasing steadily over years. I put the date Walmart came online down there just because every time I show this chart to anybody, they always ask me, so when did we get Walmart? When did they start? Transient occupancy tax. A big spike there between 2013 and 2015, or 2012 to 15. And we don't have an exact explanation for this spike, but we do have some anecdotal kind of information. One piece of information is that sports tournaments, we looked at the number of tournaments that had been held here. That increased 92% over the period of 2012 to 2015. People coming to town, staying in the hotels, that seems like a reasonable explanation. Additionally, if there's more development activity in the area, you're going to have workers coming to town and they have to stay somewhere. And the other thing that we put it in here, like I said, we can't really quantify any one of these three items because the records as they were being kept, well, two things. One is that the records could be kept a bit differently than they had been, and moving forward we probably will, so we have better TOT occupancy information. But the other thing is, it's really hard to say that, you know, tournaments went up 92%, so that's why our TOT is up. I mean, we don't have the addresses of everybody who stayed in the hotels and why they came to town. We don't have that data or that information, so we can only say this is anecdotal information. It's not scientific information. Franchise taxes. We looked back and found that the contract with Cal Waste was revised in 2018, or 2008, sorry, getting all my eights wrong. So following the revision of that contract, we found in the subsequent 2 years that the refuge franchise taxes from Cal Waste doubled over the period of 2 years. And so basically you see that big spike up and then it kind of levels off. And for the most part, those taxes will remain fairly level, except if you have new development come online, if you have, you know, more people using cable or more people using the refuse, then those numbers will go up a bit. The primary thing that drives increases in franchise taxes is revisions in the agreements with the providers. Then the next page is general fund revenues, all of them. And we've just categorized these to kind of keep it simple, because the point that we're trying to, the information that we're trying to provide for you today is really kind of a high-level piece of information. When you get your budgets, you'll see more of the detail on these numbers. There's your tax lines, charges for services and other revenues. Kind of lumped all of those together. You'll see that that line there falls off in 2017 and 2018 a bit. The primary reason that that line falls off is that, well, there's two factors involved. One is that we had been getting reimbursement for administrative costs on the wind down of the former RDA. And the successor agency has been receiving $250,000 a year for those administrative costs. However, the wind down has progressed to the point that we're not incurring that amount of cost with legal fees and staff time and so forth. So we really can't collect that number anymore. In fiscal 17 and 18, that number falls to about $62,000. I think you may remember seeing that when you approved, as the successor agency, you approved the administrative budget for the former RDA. The other factor that is in this charges for services and other revenues line is that building and development fees are in here, plan shads, all of that. we took a very conservative approach in projecting those future revenues by projecting only projects we knew were already underway. We're not going to attempt to project future development that may or may not happen. As we work through the years, when we get to the midterm between fiscal 17 and fiscal 18, we may have some revisions to those projected revenues based upon what development has been occurring. So my budget philosophy has always been, budget your revenues low and your expenses high, and you'll come out okay at the end of the day. So very conservative approach is to budget those revenues low. The third row there is the abatements, and that's a topic that's one of the, when we get to the council direction pages, this is one of the things that I'm asking the council to agree or direct staff to do, and that is to look at this abatement plan. It's been a while since it's been updated, and we need to take a look at how we're doing it, and we need to conduct a study and see if we've got the time study correct, and if we've got, you know, all the personnel being funded through the right place. That number may change once we do the study. It may not be 4.2 million when we get to fiscal 18. We don't know. We don't really have any way of knowing until we've conducted that study. And so one of the recommendations that I'm making along with the city manager is that the council direct staff to conduct an abatement study. I think that all of the recommendations that are sitting over there on the council direction slide are things that we need to do to ensure our long-term fiscal health of the city. So that said about the abatements, let's talk about the totals there. In fiscal year 16, well, let's start with 15. 15 actual total revenues are 12.9 million. In 16, the estimated revenues are 14.7. For purposes of this discussion, because what I really wanted to determine is, do we have a structural deficit? And so that was the question that I posed. And in order to determine that, you have to take one-time things out. Because to look at your structural health or whether or not you have a structural deficit, you need to look only at ongoing costs. Because one-time things will skew that analysis. So we backed out some one-time anomalies or one-time revenues that we got in fiscal 16, $571,900, to come to an adjusted fiscal 16 total revenues of 14.1. And then in 17, we have revenues at 14.4, and in 18, they're 14.5. The next two lines show the increase over fiscal 16, which is what we're calling our base year. So in 17, the revenues increased 1.7%, and in 18, they increased 2.8%. This is all really good news. That's the way we want to see revenues go. And next, we're going to look at expenditures, but before I go over there, do you have questions on this?
So the one-time anomalies, the revenues, are things like grants?
Oh, yes.
I mean, let's say, when we're looking at that $500,000, we're looking at like grant money or...
I actually listed them there at the bottom. 347,000 of it was a sales tax accounting method change, and 244,000 of it was property tax pass-through revenues. Did that help?
No.
No.
I don't understand. What, I mean, what, so, what
Well-
is the sales tax accounting methodology?
Well, what we did was, let's go back here to the,
Like, you know,
we had that period, that year there where we had that little spike up, and what we're trying to do with this slide here is to level that out. Where am I? Here. Because I don't want to say, well, my 16 revenues, if you look at just the charges for service, look at the total tax line, you have 6.8 in fiscal 15, and then you go to 7.9 in 16. A large portion of that was the sales tax anomaly, if you will.
so it was just, it wasn't like we collected more sales tax, it really was like you just changed the way you were accounting for it?
We changed the accrual method on it, yes. So in 1 year, we were not accruing, what they had not been doing was accruing the July and August payments, which were actually for sales tax before June 30. so they should have been accrued back. So we corrected that methodology. It doesn't really have an impact on your ongoing cost in total, which is why I backed it out so that we could try to get a pretty good feel for what our actual revenues ongoing are.
Okay, thank you.
So then if we want to look at expenditures, so we broke these out by categories: personnel, M&O, and minor capital. So once again, because we really want to try to determine, do we have a structural deficit or not, we didn't include capital improvement projects in here, either on the revenue or expense side. Those are kind of one-time things that will skew that analysis. So they are not included here. This is one of the things when you get your budget book and you want to compare it back to this, you're going to see some differences because your budget book will have the CIP in them. So here, total expenditures in 15 were 12.1 million, in 16 they were 14.4. But once again, we need to back out something that's a one-time thing. And you may recall a few months ago we had to pay $1 million on the RDA, the DDR, the DOF thing situation. And because I don't want to skew expenditures when I'm trying to look at what are ongoing costs, we're backing that number out. Part of this analysis also that we put in here is how much we're subsidizing the Parks and Rec fund and how much we're subsidizing lighting and landscaping districts. And these are two things where we're going to have some decision points for you a little bit later. We're going to ask you to provide some direction on how you want us to proceed to try to manage the fiscal health long-term of the city. So we put those in here because at this point, this is what the city is doing. Fiscal 15, the general fund subsidized Parks and Rec $608,000, and it had a small contribution to lighting and landscaping. In 16, the number estimated is going to be $677,000 to Parks and Rec and $54,000 to lighting and landscaping. In 17 and 18, those numbers that we put in there are the currently budgeted difference between revenues minus expense. And theoretically, the revenues minus expense is the amount that we need to budget to cover those. However, as you know, budgets are estimates, and when we get to the end of the fiscal year, the number may not be 767 because revenues might have come in higher than our budget estimate or expenses might have come in higher, so there'll be a slight difference in that number when we get to the end of the fiscal year. But for budgeting purposes, we need to put that, the difference between revenues minus expense. So our projections there on the Culture and Rec Fund are 767 in fiscal 17 and 527 in fiscal 18. So why did it drop between 17 and 18? And the reason it dropped was in 17, the Parks and Recreation has some fairly large one-time costs, and you'll see them a bit later when you get in there. Now, why aren't those one-time things backed out if we're going to talk about whether we're in a structural deficit? They're not backed out from the Parks and Rec because we're talking about the general fund having a structural deficit, not the Parks and Rec fund having a structural deficit. The general fund is going to cover that unless you direct otherwise, whether it's a one-time thing or not anyway. So if we include those numbers, then our fiscal 17 proposed is 14.9%, and in 18 it's 14.6. So the numbers to pay attention to here are the percentage increase and the dollar amount change. So it's going up 5.8% in 17 or $813,000 and 3.8% in 18 or $533,000. I know that's a lot to absorb, but bear with me because we're getting to a point here soon.
What was the difference between the actual 14-15 and the estimated 15-16? Less the one-time payments.
Part of that in the M&O line, if that's the line you're looking at, let's look at that line first. In the M&O line, a large part of that is carry forwards from fiscal 15 for professional services and other supplies and materials that weren't expended in 15 but were actually approved budget items, so they do shift forward to 16.
Okay.
And the other thing, of course, is, you know, it's a budget estimate. You know, we may use all of it, we might not. So let's look at this, let's look at this now. The answer that we're trying to get to is, do we have a structural deficit? And a structural deficit is defined as when your receipts or your revenues and your expenditures have an imbalance. And typically the imbalance is that your expenditures are greater than your receipts or greater than your revenues. And we do find that expenditures are growing faster than revenues. So this little chart here will show you the revenue numbers for 16, 17, and 18, and those tie back to the pages we were just looking at. And the change in 17 and 18, the change over fiscal 16, and it goes up 1.7% in 17 and 2.8% in 18. And then the dollar amount is in there. And then the expenditures, those numbers for 16, 17, and 18 also reference back to the expenditures we just looked at, the adjusted ones without the 1.0 million for the DDR thing. And then what is the change in expenditures? Well, expenditures are going up 5.8% in year 1 and 3.8% in year 2. So we know 5.8% expenditures are increasing is greater than the 1.7% that the revenues are increasing. So that, by definition, is a structural deficit. Our change in our expenditures are going up $813,000 in year 1 over the prior year, and our revenues are only going up $247,000 over the prior year. So our expenditures, dollar-wise, also are going up greater than or faster than revenues are increasing. So what that leaves us with at the end of the day is what is defined as a structural deficit. Now, our recommendations in the council direction section are designed for us to address this issue. I'm not recommending that we make any changes right now, but I'm recommending that we look at some things. We need to take a serious look at how we're handling some of our fiscal planning. The net line is there just so you can see revenues minus expenses, how much is it? And you see that in 17 and 18, we go negative. And that means that what we're going to be asking you to do when we present a budget to you, providing that's the direction we get from you today, is we're going to be asking you to adopt a budget for the general fund for 17 and 18 that's going to eat into fund balance a little bit. Now, I think that when we get to some of our financial fiscal management planning, we're going to find that that number is not so significant that I would say to you, don't do it. I think we're going to find that that is a manageable number as we do some financial planning moving forward. I don't think we're going to have problems with it. And bear in mind that this particular slide is a structural deficit with the subsidies to Parks and Rec and the L&L. The next slide shows you what's happening without the subsidies. So if I back the subsidies numbers out, I find that the revenue in 17, revenues are doing the same thing. Expenditures in 17 are going to be 3.4% greater than they were in 16. And in 18, they're going to be 3.5% greater than they were in 16. Now, so we look at this, we say, okay, revenues in 17 are going up 1.7%, and in 18, expenditures are going up 3.4%. So by definition, we still have a structural deficit because our expenditures are going up faster than our revenues. However, if we don't subsidize Parks and Rec and we don't subsidize the L&Ls, we find if we go revenues minus expense, we have a positive number there. So what are we going to do? Are we going to cut Parks and Rec programs so that we don't have to subsidize them? I wouldn't recommend that for the first year here. I think we need to take a closer look at it. I know these are really complicated numbers and the concept is fairly complex. So we can take a pause here. If you have questions on it or you want me to go over something again, let me know. The main takeaway, I don't expect you to memorize all the numbers, but the main takeaway that I would like you to know is that expenditures are going up faster than revenues. That's just kind of the bottom line. Questions? So we're going to get into what's included in the budget that what's included in these numbers and what's not included in these numbers, and I'm going to turn it back to Jane for that.
Thank you. And I guess the message that, the way we're doing our budget and kind of writing some notes down here is, when we budget, we want to budget ongoing costs. Our ongoing costs are typically our employees, our general operating maintenance, lights, everything that we have to pay for when we have those ongoing revenues. So we're trying to get, to the position to where we can kind of grow that, get where we can have those ongoing revenues, and then once we have those ongoing revenues, we can take a look at, other things, in the city that, we can spend, those monies on to better our community. The general fund, what's included slide, is a lot of that, those items you've seen before and I've talked about. You'll see the information technology, equipment up there. For a city of our size, I think this is probably pretty light in the way of ongoing or just one-time costs that we're focusing on. It's by no means everything that we need in order to operate and provide the services to our community. Do you have any questions on any of these items? Some of the discussions that we've had in the past is, other things that we spend our money on in the general fund. If you can click it to the next slide there. And we've had a lot of talk about the annual events and the ongoing costs of services that the staff provides for events. And, for a community, I'm all about events. It brings our citizens out. Success of businesses is our success as they spend property tax or tax revenue, sales tax, TOT. That helps drive our engine, so we can provide those services to the community. So at some point, we need to always take a look at, how do we operate our business to get more money into our business, and we need to look at those sustainability factors and value added. Our different events, and what we provide the community value added. So, a couple items on here, annual costs and events, the nonprofit rentals, that question keeps coming up. There's other things that keep coming up, discretionary funding, that the city has for other, types of programs that we have to offer. There's, quite a list out there. We haven't had a lot of time to put all that together for the council. Not, asking to make any recommendations this evening on any of this. You'll see, our recommendations later on in the budget slide, that we need to do further analysis. This is all a work in progress, and staff's going back and trying to learn and understand what it is that we are spending our money on and those costs. The next slide, again, it's a work in progress.
Before you go on,
Absolutely.
I wanted to just ask you about the event costs and stuff. Will there be a time, I know we're just in the baby stages of it, but will there be a time when the people that are putting on these events can kind of see what's going on and maybe plead their case, so to speak? I mean, just saying it's happening.
Well, yeah, and actually, for staff, these events and everything has kind of evolved out of, I guess, policy direction, and I'm here to take council policy, whether or not to continue on, or do a little bit more evaluation, on these. So I'll kind of open up to the council on direction, with this. Again, community and cities being part of events is,
Right.
I think, somewhat of a benefit to a point. In other communities that I've been at, there's other ways that communities put on events. They have organizations, they have outside donations, that come in, to help support those events. You'll see in the chart, on the slide that's above there, you have, the hard costs, soft costs, different program costs that, we actually put in, like, the soft costs are staff time. When staff's working on events, it takes away from other things that, we need to do, at times. So it's all about balancing our priorities. What is it that we want to get done versus what we can get done based on the time we have. So really I'm looking for council direction on, how do we want to prioritize the funds, going back to that family scenario. We got so much money coming in, where are we going to spend spend these dollars and what is the best value, to spend those dollars. And it might be going back up to the community and asking the community.
On your soft costs, and I understand most of that is staff time, but how much of that is overtime? Or do we know?
I'm gonna turn to Ms. Boyd and probably Chief on that one.
The first thing to know about this table is that it's a work in progress. What we did, and it's a citywide, or department citywide project, because police get involved, public works gets involved, and everybody's involved. We've asked them to give us their estimated hours. Some of them are overtime, some are not. We haven't split that number out.
Okay.
When the departments gave us numbers, they told us which was overtime, which was regular time. But for purposes of this chart, we haven't calculated that separately. We just calculated the total cost.
Will that be separately calculated when you come back with whatever follow-up you've got?
Yes,
Yeah.
when we come back with this again, we'll have, not work in progress, but we'll have, vetted this through all the departments, make sure we're capturing relevant costs. And yes, we'll give it to you as probably 3 categories in soft cost. Regular time for regular line staff, overtime for line staff, and we may bring to you also a number that's it for directors or individuals who are on salary, that even if we cut this program, we'd still be paying that salary. So it's kind of a different number. So we will give you those details.
Is there a reason why the Winter Bird Festival isn't on this?
We purposely took it off because most of those costs are paid, we have revenues that offset most of those costs. The net cost for Winter Bird is about $3,000. When we bring this back, we'll have a refined number on that one for you as well. But for this purpose today, we took that one off.
And the council needs to really understand where, the money's going. How is the council in the policy direction? And, as I've seen in other cities, and in this city, it's, over the years, you start, buying stuff, spending stuff, and it's like your cable, TV at home, all of a sudden you're notching it up and you're not using all those channels. Why do you pay for the, premium package when you're only using the basic package? So, we need to take a look at, where our costs are going and what it is that we really want to spend our money on.
Do you have any way of estimating on the other side, the revenue side? Because we know that sales tax will be collected.
It's a great
possible
question. It's a great
hotel occupancy. I mean, it's easier to look at the hard costs, but how do you put a dollar to the revenue that's involved as well that's coming in? And this is all about both sides.
Right.
I think.
It is, absolutely, and that's a great question, and that's kind of a missing piece that, I don't really have a handle on it, and a lot of that is hard to quantify. A lot of times when you look at events, is a, more of a community event versus an event that brings people to the community. When I talk to, and not in this community, but other communities, I've talked to a lot of businesses, and they've always said, especially restaurants, hey, you have an event, even something like a wine walk, restaurants are packed because people are out, and they'll go to the event and then decide, haven't had dinner, I'll go and eat dinner. So you kind of see, peaks in revenue. How to quantify that has always been difficult, but that's something we can, take a look at and see what we can do to try and analyze. It goes back to what I said, the value added, to the event. What is that, and how do we quantify it?
I know we did economic development studies several years ago. We have a big binder on that, and some of the things they suggested was to have increased festivals and other things. So there must be some kind of value to that.
Yeah.
And balance, like you said, with the cost and with the revenue and the cost.
The Bird Festival and the Independence Day celebration, those basically are the 2 events that really are solely pretty much run by the city. And those are the 2 events in which we see revenue. All the rest of the events, all the revenue is going out to the nonprofits or whoever's running that event. Not what. So we're paying the cost, we're having a certain amount of cost, but we're not getting, we don't have any idea what their revenue is. So we can only look at revenue from the events that we run. But those revenues, those events that are ran by nonprofits, we don't have any idea what their revenue is, or what they spend their revenues on, or what we're subsidizing. I mean, that's always been my concern, is that we still have no idea about what we're subsidizing, whether we're subsidizing money that's leaving our community or money that's staying in our community, and how that money is being utilized. But I appreciate the laying it out.
Well, I think what you're saying is there needs to be profit and loss statements for whoever's putting on the event, and I think way back when we did have, that was done for a while. I don't know what happened.
We haven't done it since I've been on the council,
Right.
because I've asked for it and was told no.
Oh, really?
There's more work on
Somebody
this,
told you
and
no?
Yes.
there's more work on this, and as we get through and finalize the budget, we're not gonna, get answers before.
Right.
We need to bring a budget adoption to the council. But as, we move into, the summer, we'll work on this and bring it back to the council with, kind of a more in-depth analysis on this. Yeah, I think what we're going to see is come mid-year, especially, if we move forward with our cost allocation, analysis and some other factors, we're probably gonna have some significant changes, in the next year's budget, to take a look at and additional discussion items, for the council.
And I'm assuming that most of the soft costs are coming out, probably out of police when it comes to all the parade stuff, public works and parks and rec. Is that right?
Yes.
And I'm thinking at Christmas, when we do the lighting of the night, that's heavily on the police for that particular celebration.
I thought there, I know we're getting a little bit off track too, but I thought there was some, talking about changing the route and stuff this year with the other police chief?
Changing the what?
The route.
The route.
Oh.
The route.
The route.
Correct?
Yes, we are in discussions with the Lighting of the Night Parade Committee, and we have presented the city's options for the parade route.
Thank you. Good idea.
So this is a start, but it is a significant part of the budget that the council needs to be aware of that we're working on. The next slide is what's not included, and I go back to, what are the things that we had to pull out that, we really need, but, there's just lots of money there. The third line down is vehicle replacement. Our fleet is aging. There's a lot of vehicles out there that really need to be replaced. I think the only vehicles I left in were some Parks and Rec vehicles. And you'll see the one of our recommendations to come back, for vehicles, IT, and our facilities, to really put together, a replacement program for these different categories, so we can continue to fund these on an ongoing basis. Typically, you should have an internal service fund, set up for these types of accounts. So when we need a vehicle, the money's there, to pay for it, and we need to get ourselves in a position to do that. But that'll take some time, and hopefully, seed money will come our way at some point to make that happen. So those are just some items that we just did not include. Any questions on that slide?
Yeah, under the CDD, the track it system, is that not something that can be funded under CARF? The Capital Acquisition Replacement Fund?
I'd have to, I know that.
Yes or no? It could be. There is a separate fund source for that, at least there was, I presume it's still in place.
One of the reasons that we left it out was that we being the city IT committee, the reason that we left it out was that we were told by the community development director that wasn't that critical this year, and IT really has its hands full with a whole lot of other things. So all of these items on this list are things that sooner or later we're going to have to do it. I think what we're saying, what's not included in this budget cycle. It will have to be done at some point, and at that point, yes, instead of falling in the general fund, your point is noted, and we'll make that adjustment that, yes, CARP should pay for it.
In part of our discussions were, getting IT stuff in the budget, but what kind of staff time do we have available to get it done? It's one thing to, say, hey, we need all these needs, but I, match.
You hired a
the
new
staffing
IT
for
guy.
that. That's how I'm going to. So the next slide is our facility maintenance, and you know, one of the things that Mr. Winkler's shop has put together, and asked them to go through all of our facilities, and you know, over the years, there's a lot of deferred maintenance that you know hasn't happened and needs to happen, and you know, some of that you know, gets us into a, you know, position over the years that, you know, comes to a point that we just need to find the money to do it. So we need, you know, plans in place. You know, if we build something, just like our parks and our facilities, you know, have a maintenance, you know, replacement plan and to maintain all of our facilities. This is a snapshot of, you know, some of our major facilities within the city and what we need over the next 3 years. None of that up there is included in the budget. What is included in the budget, and help me out if I get this incorrect here, is we have $100,000 of just an operation and maintenance items that we need on an ongoing basis to operate and maintain the buildings, and we have another $100,000, either it's in contract services or facility services, you know, to, you know, tackle the real priority items, the what ifs that come up. Steve, you want to add to that?
That's correct, but that's not extra funding. That's essentially status quo with a little bit of a bump to try to make a little bit of headway, but it doesn't put a dent in all of the, behind each of these numbers is a detailed list of things that need to be done, from tile cleaning to roof repairs to AC repairs, that we can see that are going to be problematic or either are failing or will fail in all likelihood in the next 3 years.
And so, you know, part of the budget recommendations is to come back with, you know, how are we going to tackle this? You know, we just, you know, we got the numbers, we got, you know, what needs to be done. We just need to put a plan together and figure out how to make that work. Next slide, Ms. Boyd.
Okay, so we're back down to some numbers that are just gonna, you know, if you mind to quote again, because it's kind of complicated, but bear with me on this. This line chart first, what we're looking at is what's the fund balance in the general fund and the Parks and Rec fund. For all intents and purposes, these are one fund, because the general fund subsidizes Parks and Rec when Parks and Rec needs it. So basically, they're one fund. But what we did here is the very bottom line, that green one down there at the very bottom, that's the Parks and Rec fund balance. And you'll see that it really sits at zero, or close to zero, because the general fund subsidizes it, and it's really a part of the general fund. You see there at the end, it's 17 and 18, it kind of dips down. We want to show you what's happening there. Up above, there's two other lines. One is green and one is yellow. The green one, they're very at the end of fiscal 17 and 18. You can see it take an uptick there. That's the general fund without subsidizing Parks and Rec. That's that one slide we saw a little while ago that had some positive numbers. If revenues minus expenses were positive, that means that general fund balance would be going up a little bit. That combined line, or the yellow line there, that is going down in fiscal 17-18, is when we combine the general fund and the Parks and Rec fund balance together, because the general fund's going to subsidize it. And what you're going to see is when the general fund subsidizes it, its fund balance starts to go down. And that's what we saw in an earlier slide, that we saw with the subsidies, and we saw some negative numbers. There's a dotted line on there. You might be able to see it on your printout, but it's almost impossible, I think, see it on the overhead. But the dotted line is a trend line, and it's just going down. So what we're doing is looking at the trend over the years, and the fund balance in total has been going down. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about fund balance reserve requirements. Yes.
So the dotted line is basically showing that since '08, our general fund has continued to decrease.
Yeah, and it's not
Because during the recession, they dipped so much into our reserves to keep saving.
Yeah, you had to dip into it. You see that is not a real steep line?
No, it's not,
Yeah.
but it's gone,
It is falling, yes, that's correct.
and that structurally would be problem, right?
Yeah,
that
but
certainly-
it is not optimal, no. You know, at worst, we'd want it to be level, but at best, we'd like to see it going up a little bit, but, this happens to be what we're looking at right now.
Yeah. So most of, and you probably have it, but really our reserves have been what's taken the biggest hit, correct?
Well, let's take a look at reserves. We have some slides on reserves. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Before you get to our,
Sure.
far with that, I had a question about Parks and Rec. I know that we're subsidizing, as you're saying, Parks and Recreation, but does that take into account the abatements that are coming out of it?
Abatements are included, yes, in Parks and Rec. And that's part of the abatement and cost allocation study that we need to do. We need to update that, see, are we doing this in the best possible way? And so we really need to look at that again. And yes, it is in there.
Thank you.
It's in there on the Parks and Rec side. General fund balance reserve requirement. Now, we had, back in 2003, the City Council adopted a policy that had a whole lot of different metrics in it, and they're listed there. In 2014, the City Council adopted a reserve policy that was just called economic uncertainty, and it required a minimum and a maximum fund balance requirement. The minimum, and they're both based off the total appropriations for the general fund and the Parks and Rec fund. The minimum was 10% of the annual appropriations for those two funds combined, and the maximum was 20% of those two funds combined. And it's a much more typical kind of reserve policy than the 2003 policy. Jane and I have been looking at this, and we're looking at that 20% figure, and we're thinking that 20% is probably a little bit low. Standard practice or best practices might be to go to 25%. 25% would be 1/4 of your year, or 3 months. And if you think about it in terms of your personal budget, and you think about how much money do I need to set aside in an emergency fund, some financial planners will tell you, it used to be 6 months, 5 months, whatever it is, you determine what amount do I need to keep aside in an emergency fund, should I need it? So it's kind of the same concept here, is how much should we be retaining? And one of our requests for the council to consider providing direction on is whether or not we should amend the reserve policy to go from 20 to 25%. So let's look at,
What is the current fund for reserve?
the reserve numbers are listed here.
These are the actuals?
Yeah, these are the required reserves.
No, what I'm asking, what is the actual reserves of the
These,
city?
well, you're looking for fund balance, I think. And
Correct.
I think that's on page, there's the next slide over here. The projected fund balances. So if we want to look at this, what is our projected fund balance in these 3 years? And in 17 and 18, that projected fund balance is after the subsidies to Parks and Rec and LML. And then let's look at the reserve requirement for, under the 14 policy. What is the reserve requirement, and is there any excess? And then let's look at it under a proposed policy at 25%, what would be the reserve requirement and what would be the excess? And the reason the excess number is important is you make a determination when you're doing financial planning, this is how much is prudent for us to keep in the bank and not spend. And that's what your reserve is. How much is prudent for us to keep and not spend? And so then anything over that, is that available for us to spend? The answer is probably yes. But you have to think about, what can I spend that on? Do I spend it on one-time things, or do I spend it on things that are going to be ongoing? And best practices are that you spend that excess only on one-time things, because you're going to have that excess maybe this year, but you're not necessarily going to have it next year, so don't spend it on something that's going to be ongoing. Spend it only on one-time things. So we wanted to point out what would be that amount that would be available under both the 14 policy and the 15 policy.
So even under the 14 policy, it would appear that we were always had a 25% reserve, I mean, or better,
But
right?
you have an excess over reserve, so yes, that's correct.
So even though our policy might have been a maximum of 20%, we were actually
There was more money there, that's correct.
there.
And when you think about it, is that the fiscally best thing to do? I mean, it's always, okay, yeah, it's great, let's have more money. But the consequence of not using that amount over your prudent reserve is that we have deferred maintenance, and we have IT deferrals, and we have vehicles that are deferred. And so you have to, when you're financially planning, decide, what's my prudent amount, and any excess, how do I want to use it? So that's part of this discussion. So those are those numbers, and I just want to bring them to your attention. Do you have any other questions on the reserves? Let's launch into Parks and Rec. We will try to do something that's a little more fun. I always say they have more fun in Parks and Rec than we do in finance. It's a good thing I'm not in Parks and Rec, because the last time I planned a party, it was a disaster. So you don't want me over there. So what I have here is, because I'm not really trying to determine whether or not Parks and Rec has a structural deficit, what I'm trying to determine is how much does the general fund need to subsidize Parks and Rec. So let's look at what our revenues are. Separated out the Galt market revenues from the other Parks and Rec program revenues, because I think it's a point of interest. Intergovernmental stuff, you see there in fiscal 16, intergovernmental takes a jump up, and that's grants. And because I'm not trying to determine structural deficit, I'm leaving the grants in there. And then the transfers in, Parks and Rec has some abatements of its own. It gets reimbursed from other funds for things. And so then here is our revenue line, and you see, it's flat. It's probably as flat as it can be. If we took that 317, backed most of that out of fiscal 16, it would be the same amount, 3.7 million all the way across the board. Let's look at expenditures, and here we're looking at expenditures by categories. And I left the CIP in here because once again, I'm not trying to determine if we have a structural deficit in Parks and Rec, because it's getting covered by the general fund. So here, basically, we have a bit of a blip up in fiscal 16 because we have some CIP in there. Those are things that were budgeted for the library and the Harvey Park. So it's basically, at the end of the day, what can we say about that? It's not really going up much. You see in fiscal 17, minor capital has gone up to 243, but that includes things like the class software that we need to upgrade. If we don't upgrade class software, Armando's going to have a whole hard time running his programs. That's the online registration software. So, as we looked at what things to leave in and what to include, we were looking at things that are essential to keep, operations moving forward. So then let's look at the net on Parks and Rec. So it's revenues minus expense. That net number there corresponds to the number that you saw over on the general fund, is the amount that the general fund needed to subsidize Parks and Rec.
Back on the other slide, your expenditures, the transfers out, are those mainly your abatements?
That's correct. Yes, we do need to update abatements.
That's big.
Any other questions on this part of Parks and Rec?
Well, I know we discussed it, I guess still part of what I need to understand with Parks and Rec is I understand that we have a revenue source in the market being those dollars. I still don't really understand, as compared to other communities, what are other communities spending on Parks and Rec, right? I mean, we have this luxury of a market that's brought in extra revenue to us. So I guess there's part of me that still wants to understand, when you look at, we can always say that, we're subsidizing Parks and Rec, but I think all communities subsidize Parks and Rec. I mean, I think that Parks and Rec are part of what the community expects us to provide, and I think that we should provide. It's part of what, what things should be spent on. So I guess there's still always that concern of me about, I don't understand, I just don't know enough about what other communities look like to be able to say, well, is it fair that we, is it, that we spend, $750,000?
I looked at the city of Lodi, and their subsidy rate was about 40%. You will find in every city that I'm familiar with in California, yes, Parks and Rec is subsidized. The determination that we have to make is it subsidized at the right rate? And I'm not asking you to try and decide that tonight. One of our recommendations is that we do a business plan for Parks and Rec and we analyze that. And if you direct us to do that, we'll bring that back to you and we'll look at it program by program. Is this a program that we want to keep? And if so, do we want to subsidize it and at what rate? I'm not in any of this saying that we shouldn't subsidize it. What I'm saying here today is that we need to do some fiscal planning. There are several things that we need to look at. We need to look at abatements, we need to look at a business plan for the Parks and Rec, and some other things that we'll get to when we get to those slides. But yes, I mean, you can't charge enough for your programs, your Parks and Rec programs to make them break even. People will go somewhere else. It just becomes too costly. Because very thin.
I think, I like her question because it's, you know, in almost all other communities, at least in California, Parks and Rec are general fund supported.
Yeah.
That's primary.
Right.
And we have a flea market that provides a certain amount of revenue each year. I think what would be interesting to me, and I would like to see the numbers, is maybe on a per capita basis, what is the subsidy? Because I think that would put it in relationship to what our per capita subsidy is.
That's kind of what, what do communities of like size, or what do other communities?
Well, and I think it should be like size, because, I mean,
Yeah,
it should be.
on their citizens. If we have
Right.
25,000, a like city of 25,000, what would their Parks and Rec budget look like? Regardless of where it's coming from, what would their Parks and Rec budget look like as compared to ours?
And, you know, we need to do a lot more analysis on that and take a look at it. That's where the business plan needs to come into play. You know, a lot of it's programs, you know, are there like programs that those cities are subsidizing, and how much are those programs? You know, aquatics, you know, I'm very familiar with aquatics programs. You know, you'll never, you know, break even on aquatics. You'll always subsidize, you know, aquatics, but do you have?
They provide service.
But they provide a service, but do you have a year-round pool that's covered, or do you have, you know, summer, you know, only, aquatic program? You know, so there's, you know, you may have a like city, but they may have different, you know, programs that, you know, they offer. So we're gonna have to kind of look at all of that and bring that back to the council and try and quantify it.
So when we talk about these transfers out, the million plus, 1.2 million or whatever, so when we talk about abatements, is this like other departments charging the Parks and Rec budget? Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, let me give you kind of the short answer to that. The abatements include administrative costs, so it includes everything from city council, city clerk, city attorney, city manager, HR, finance, and IT, and engineering as well, but that's kind of a separate thing. It's not administrative. So you look at what are your administrative costs. In the abatement plan calculates how much should other funds pay for those administrative costs. So there's a number of metrics that are involved in an abatement plan. You know, it's based off of things like the number of FTEs in a department. Parks and Rec happens to have a lot of part-timers that, you know, circle through, so that takes more time for HR. There may be a department that, you know, maybe has a change in staffing once or twice a year. So they're going to, under the current abatement model, they're going to have a larger HR assessment than someone else. It also includes things like how many payroll checks are written. If you have, you know, dozens of part-time people and you're writing payroll checks for them, then you're taking up more administrative time. It also includes things like accounts payable checks that are written, purchase orders that are issued, the number of agenda items that come to the city council, and there's a variety of metrics that go into the plan. Those are the things that we need to look at when we do an abatement study. Are our metrics appropriate for this year? Are they appropriate at this particular point in time? My understanding is it's been a while since the abatement model was updated. And so just as a matter of routine, general best financial practices is a lot of cities will look at that abatement plan every 5 years and reevaluate the model. Because it's the further you get away from the point at which the model was developed, the further you get from the reality. You have departments that reorganize, and you have all kinds of things that happen that kind of skew the original model and the metrics upon which you're doing the calculation. So yeah, you look at that and you go, wow, that seems really high. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. We need to do a study.
Is there documentation though? I
Yes,
mean,
there
is
is.
it like how many employee hours are abated? So there is backup.
So there is time studies as well as, you know, the metrics I was talking about. City staff do a time study every year where they take a 2-week period of time and write down what they did. There's your original time study would look at, you know, 52 weeks. What did you do? Whereas as you implement the model, you're going to look at a selected period of time that you look at each year. And the further you get away from that original time study, the less relevance it's going to have. And so an abatement cost allocation study will go back and look at 52 weeks and see where do we need to make some adjustments.
Is there a comparison, say, to public works, their abatement?
Comparison to public works, I'm not sure. Could you elaborate on that question? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, don't all the departments
Yes.
have abatement?
Yes.
So, you know, the other departments, I just happen to pick public works.
Well, there's
Looking
a
at it.
business department.
Or like the police department as well.
Well, I think Mr. Winkler wants to talk about that.
Well, I agree, this looks like a big number, but if you look at what's being abated to water and sewer and streets and storm and lighting landscape districts, it's a big number.
Can I ask you?
I think one thing it's since I've, known about the abatement process is that there needs to be some consistency, and I don't know that there is consistency in the methodology by which these numbers are calculated. Department by department, maybe finance takes a 2-week window out of the year. That's maybe typical. I don't know what Public Works does. I know community development did it differently. It was a 52-week. That's the way they did it and continue to do it. I don't know how it's being done now. So I think that there needs to be at least some explanation as to why you are not doing whatever you're doing, and some commonality so that not each department is doing something completely different.
I absolutely agree.
And my thought was, I'm just gonna throw some numbers out there. Let's just say that, when everybody hands their personnel costs in to whoever has to do it, if you look at the, pardon me?
I'm clearing my throat.
Oh, if you look at, let's say it costs $500,000 a year to, do all of that. Would it be more feasible to hire a payroll person that just does that as opposed to how much it costs for those abatements?
That is
Do you look
something-
into that too?
We'll look into all of those factors when we do a study. We'll look into how much, but let's develop a study model and then let's look at how we're going to implement it. Is there a reasonable way to implement it? One of the things that the city has now is that we don't have control of the model. It's being controlled by the outside consultant who develops the model. We go out for an RFP, what I would say, we provide him our data and they calculate it. Just a giant Excel spreadsheet, don't worry, it's not that bad. I see you frowning, so don't frown, it's okay. But what I recommend when we go out on an RFP to get a consultant is, I would prefer a consultant who would develop the model and then give it to us to implement. Because why should we pay them every year to implement the model?
Right.
A lot of consultants don't want to do that because they develop the model as their proprietary software. So, there's a whole lot of factors that go into it. But yeah, implementation, is it going to cost us more to implement this thing than is reasonable? We'd certainly have to look at that. What's the best way to implement it?
I wanted to ask Parks and Rec a question before we move on. Do most people you go online to sign up for the programs?
I would say a majority are starting to go online. Our fees for our online payments, for the credit card payments, have increased every year, and you'll see that in our budget this year, that we ask more and more for that cost.
Okay. I know when I'm in there, I see parents, at the desk signing up, so I just wondered if it's being used that much.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
So most of the abatements are personnel costs, correct? Most of it's, we talked about administration.
As opposed to hard costs, it's the cost of operating the programs. It's the cost of operating, for instance, finance, personnel and supplies and materials.
So it's not just a personnel cost, they actually abate from the funds, things for like equipment and...
They would get a proportional or a calculated share of M&O as well, yeah.
I have to ask this, do we have any comparison with other cities, how much the departments abate?
I don't at the moment, but we can certainly fold that comparison to other cities into our analysis. I mean, that was
Yeah,
kind
I'm
of
not talking
interesting
just
to know.
about Parks and Recs, I'm talking about overall, all the departments.
Yeah, you'll see when you look at other cities that everyone kind of has their own little methodology that they use. You know, you'll have some cities where you have, for instance, utility billing clerks who work in finance would be charged directly to the utility fund, whereas the method that we're using here is that they're charged to the general fund, and then it's through the abatement process that it gets charged back to the utility funds. There's a number of different methodologies that are used, and so apples to apples might be kind of hard, but we can certainly provide you with some input and information about what other cities do. I have this slide for you. I think graphics are always more fun than numbers. But we did some history here on the Parks and Rec, and we see that in some years, the subsidy amount is the little yellow line that's going down, or in a few years there in the middle it's going up. You see, in some years, the Parks and Rec, the Galt market, and the other revenues covered their costs, and in other years it didn't. It just varies. I haven't delved too far into why that variance occurs, but I suspect it's related to, you know, number of programs that are run, number of participants they got, how bad was the weather that year, did they have to cancel programs? I'm sure it has a lot to do with those sorts of things.
No, this doesn't include the market though, does it?
It does.
It does include the market, so definitely the weather and everything else would play a part in it.
So you're projecting for 16 and 17 that the revenues will drop?
No, yeah, if they pulled the right data file. The revenues are going down because of, we go back to the revenue chart, table is back on slide 33, out there. So there in 16 you have that intergovernmental 317,000. Because in the case of Parks and Rec, I didn't back out the one-time stuff because I'm not really that concerned about whether or not it has a structural deficit because the general fund's covering them. So that's why you see that little.
So that's why there's a drop in revenue.
So then I'm going to move on to what's included and pass it back over to Jean.
You know, a lot of these items we've already discussed, but there's a couple items on there that the market definitely needs in order to continue to operate. You know, the blowers for the market are getting old and you know, need replacement. The you know, a lot of refurbishing of some of the shade fabric and trash bins. So we've included all those in our vehicles. Probably the worst in the fleet, so we need to kind of help them do their job, give them the right tools they need.
What kind of trash bins do we use that aren't provided by Cal Waste?
They're not, we've purchased those cans.
The big containers or the?
All of them, the 2-yard containers, and then I think there's 64-gallon trash cans.
Oh, we purchased them all?
Yes. We actually did purchase them from Cal Waste.
We did.
Last time, but the original purchase was from another company, Waste Management.
Those aren't provided by Cal Waste then?
No, they're not.
Has it always been that way?
Yes. Since we've implemented the new compactor rover system.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
So then, what's not included, Jean?
Yeah, just a few items that we're going to kind of hold off, kind of evaluate as our revenues come in and look at mid-year where we want to spend our money. But at this point, we decided to hold off on these items in Parks and Recreation until we can kind of put our business plans together and move forward.
What about rodent control?
That's scary. I was thinking the same thing. Can we?
Gophers?
Oh, well, yeah, we're just not going to control them at all. No, I'm just
And, go ahead.
This was for a system that would use exhaust fumes to rid our gophers and squirrels that are at Meadowview Park and Harvey Park. primarily. They cause a lot of damage to our baseball fields. So we would, the cost to actually have it done after, I think, about four treatments would pay for the actual machine for us to just purchase it, so we wanted to purchase one.
What's a new pack mule cart?
Those are the golf carts that are at the market.
Okay.
It's a specific brand.
I gotta ask, a wood chipper?
It's, what we do is, we would, fallen trees, we had a big limb fall at Harvey Park, an oak tree. We would take some of the smaller branches, mulch them down, and then put them into our landscaping.
Okay, thank you.
On the grading and asphalt, where would that be? I'm just curious.
That'd be at the Galt Market. What we wanted to do is, put in a new gate on the southwest corner by A1. Try and get more traffic through there, to make those spots more appealing to, vendors, so they would print them.
Okay, so it's not something that's in existence, it's a potential trip and fall or safety issue?
No, it is not.
Okay.
So, if you have no more questions on that, we can move on to the slide called Council Direction. And I don't know if Mr. Palazzo wants to comment on these items? You want me to talk about them?
Yeah, go for it. You can.
Basically, the items that are here are things that we believe are important to the long-term financial health of the city. And so we're recommending that council directs us to do these things. We're not asking you to approve anything tonight, because we'll bring all of these items back to you. What we're asking you is to give us direction to do them.
Maybe look at, Mr. Rudolph, we can get a council consensus on these items and kind of go through each of them, make sure that we can kind of move forward. You agree with our direction?
Because clearly we don't want to go off in a direction that's not in line with the policy that the council has established. So that's what we're asking you for tonight.
So you want to go through each one individually, just talk about the big picture, then we can go back?
The first item there is the recommended change to the general fund reserve policy from 20% to 25%.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
Right now, we're at 20% and we have excess.
A required reserve is 20%, and there is excess, yes.
Okay. Oh,
Above that.
that's what I mean.
Okay.
So, and you had mentioned that if we have excess above our reserves, that we're not using that money, and that's not a good thing. So, then how is that 25% better?
Here's my point of view on it, is that, let's go back to what's a prudent amount for us to retain. And I think that 3 months or 25% of the year is more prudent, if you will, than 20%. Because as we go through these other items, when we get down to developing, for example, internal service funds to fund some of our vehicle and equipment replacement, building maintenance, IT moving forward, when we look at those, we need some seed money to get those funds started. And so where we would be looking for that seed money is any amount that's in excess of the required reserve in the general fund. So I don't want to spend down general fund balance more than we should, and I think 25% is more prudent than 20. So when we come to look at ISF funds, we want to say, well, this 25% is sacrosanct. That's our reserve. We can't spend it. So here's what's left that we can perhaps use as seed money if the council wants to set up some internal service funds. That's the thinking behind going to 25. I think 25 is, that reserve amount is the amount that the council will establish by resolution and cannot be different until the council adopts another resolution to change it. So it couldn't be spent unless the council wanted to. I talked too much and talked beyond the point.
Well, I was just thinking that we wanted to use that excess
We do, and let's look back for a minute.
because it wasn't doing any good sitting there.
But the question is, how much do we want to use? My concern is this: if we look at the 2014 policy, you see the excess over the reserve there. Let's just look at fiscal 16. It's projected to be 2.2 million. That's a nice chunk of change to set up some ISF funds with. However, let's say we use 2.2 million to set up the ISF funds, and then we have something happens in the economy, we have a downturn. Then we only have 25%, or what is 2 divided by 12? You know, we don't have, three months of the year, we have less than 3 months of a cushion. So if you look at a proposed policy at 25%, then our excess over the reserve goes down to 1.4 million in fiscal 16. Well, that's still a chunk of change that can be used to set up an ISS fund. It's not as big a dollar, but I have a much more better comfort level at a required reserve of 4.2 than I have at 3.4. And so that's really kind of the thinking behind it. But then, of course, council adopts reserve policies, and it depends on what your policy direction is and what amount you have comfort level with.
Well, I think I'd be much more comfortable to increase it to 25%. I think we should have 3 months of operating budget.
I agree.
And what I'm looking for from you today is direction to prepare that, bring it back to us, and we'll determine whether we want to approve it or not.
What impact will that have on our overall budget if we say we want to go to 25% reserves?
Nothing is true.
It doesn't really impact our numbers. What it impacts is how much we have in excess and how much we can use for something else. But there is an indirect impact in that if we go down to a smaller excess amount, that's that much less that we can set aside in perhaps in some other ISF fund or something else that the council wants to do. Okay.
So do you need a consensus or do you need it as a motion?
I mean, either would be appropriate, but if staff is comfortable with the consensus.
And I'm comfortable with the consensus because, and you tell me how you want to do things here in Galt. My experience might be a little different. Because when we bring this back to you, then you'll vote on it, yay or nay. You'll tell us, yeah, we want it or we don't want it.
Well, you know, the motion, you know, if we do a motion, you can be just, you know, bring back a reserve policy, and then we can discuss it further. And there may be some other items on here that we do need a motion on.
Possibly, I'll defer to Mr. Rudolph, but on all of these items, you'll have to approve them or adopt them when they come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, a motion to bring back the policy is certainly appropriate. And by directing staff to bring the policy back, that doesn't mean that you will necessarily be obligated to support it when it comes back and you see it or not.
I'll move to bring the reserve policy back.
I have a motion by Councilmember Hewer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Powers. Call for the vote, please.
Vice Mayor Payne? Aye. Councilmember Hewer?
Aye.
Councilmember Campion?
Aye.
Councilmember Powers?
Aye.
Mayor Cruz?
Aye. Okay.
So then, jump in here if you want, Gene, otherwise I'll just keep plowing through
Keep
them.
plowing through. You're doing good.
The next item is, and this one will be a part of the budget adoption, and the reason that I want you to give me some direction on this today is that as we prepare the budget and present it to you, what I'm saying is that we're going to use fund balance in excess of reserves to cover Parks and Rec and the L&L fund. And I highly recommend that we go ahead and do that this year with the understanding that we need to do some of these other fiscal management things. I think that the amount of the deficit or the amount of the needed coverage is small enough that I don't think it has the adverse impact of it is not prohibitive to doing it. Typically, you're not going to find a finance director stand up here and tell you to adopt a deficit budget. Typically, you wouldn't. But in this case, I would say do that for the Parks and Rec fund, and we get to the L&L. The L&Ls aren't listed here. They're kind of in the next section, and it has its own council direction section. I think it's prudent to do that. I don't believe that it's prudent for us to sit here and try to make cuts to make it balanced. This year, we don't have enough information.
Then that's kind of my follow-up question, because it wants this recommendation for both 16 and 16, 17, 18. When would the cost allocation study and the business plan, when can we reasonably expect those back before council to consider?
It needs to come back before you do your, or as part of your midterm, when you review before you go into year 2 of your 2-year budget. And the reason that we're asking you to give direction to prepare the budget in this way is because we adopt 2-year budgets here.
Right.
My goal is that it would need to come back to you at least at the time you do midterm, if not before then.
I would prefer to see it before. I don't know about council.
I actually would too, because, to be honest with you, as a finance director with my reputation on the line, I don't want to be the one that adopts the deficit budget when something goes south. I think that the way to keep this from going south is that we need to do the abatement study, we need to do a market plan, Parks and Rec plan, we need to do these things. I think once we do them, the picture may change. I think the picture will change, but I don't want to say by what, because I need to do the underlying studies. We need to do the finance, the foundational work. I'm saying that we get that back to you before the second year of the budget.
And I agree with that completely.
And that could be part of the motion.
Okay, so now a motion to the effect.
So could we make one motion for all three of these things to happen together? I mean,
Yeah, we may not bring it all back at one council meeting, but, I think our target needs,
cost allocation of the business.
we need to, once we start developing those plans, we need to get those back to the council and see how that impacts our budget.
But you can have all three items in one motion from us, I think is what she's asking.
We can do,
Yeah, before, we want it brought back before the second year.
Right.
So
That's
that's
fine.
a wide range of whatever.
That's fine.
Yes, you can.
All right, do I have a motion to that effect?
So I'm going to motion to use the general fund balance in excess of the reserve for the 16, 17, 17, 18. With the
budget year.
Cost allocation, with the cost allocation study and the business plan to be brought back to us prior to the 2017, 2018 budget, midterm budget.
With sufficient time to review.
With sufficient time for review. Prior to the adoption.
I think when we get those documents, we're gonna wanna have a study session, at least. Yeah. So, I think to go over that and prior to the budget.
Prior to the adoption of the midterm budget.
Correct.
And I'm a fan of, getting this information and having some study sessions so you understand it. I mean,
Good.
we need to, these are, foundational items for our community and our city for us to move forward, so we need to take the time to make,
Absolutely.
discuss it and do it right.
All right, so I have a motion on the floor, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember, Vice Mayor Payne. Any further discussion? Call for the vote, please.
Vice Mayor Payne?
Aye.
Councilmember Hewer?
Aye.
Councilmember Campion?
Aye.
Councilmember Powers?
Aye.
Mayor Cruz?
Aye. Passes unanimously.
Okay, so we're on page 2, the staff recommendations. Thank you all for hanging in there on this. I know it's, financial stuff can be really challenging. We talked a little bit about developing internal service funds. The idea behind an internal service fund for these items is that you're routinely setting aside money for vehicle replacement. So when you need to replace a vehicle, you have the money there to do so. I think that when we get into the study of how to set these funds up, I think we're going to find that we're behind in replacing vehicles. And so we may not be able to catch up right away, but what you do is you develop a plan to catch up these vehicles. And over a number of years, whether it's 2 years or 5 years, you get on course where you're setting money aside to replace vehicles and then you're routinely replacing them. Building maintenance is the same sort of thing. We're really behind right now. You saw that other slide of 1.2 million. Obviously, we're not going to be able to fund all of that right away. But we developed some kind of plan and a strategy, a fiscal plan for how we're going to maintain our facilities. And IT is the same thing. So that piece, that excess over required reserve in the fund balance is the piece that I'm thinking of as the funds that will seed ISF funds. But then, of course, you need to understand always in all of these things, direct us to proceed, do that, put it together, bring it back to you for review and possible adoption.
How does that, work with our capital improvement? I'm talking specifically about the vehicle replacement.
I believe that in this city, what we're doing with vehicle replacement is we're putting them in, is it in minor capital? So in minor capital, we've been putting them in so it falls into the routine operational costs. So the vehicles are not in the CIP budget per se, where the CIP has the larger capital kinds of projects. That doesn't mean we're not capitalizing them as assets. This, we're talking about as a budgeting and accounting feature.
So what is the fund source for each one of these? Is it going to be out of, water, sewer, storm drain, general fund?
Moving forward, well, there's two answers. There are two parts to the answer to that. The utility funds are a little bit different than your other governmental funds, like your your general fund and your parks and rec to know that some of your special revenue funds are governmental funds. Your utility funds really should purchase and pay for and own their own assets. So that would be a part of the analysis, because we no doubt have vehicle, maybe we don't, maybe we have all the vehicles we need in the utilities, but I'm guessing we probably don't. And so that would be part of the analysis. We need to look at, here's the vehicle program, replacement program for the governmental funds, and here's what the utilities are going to do if they're not already doing it.
Yeah, another way to look at this is, who owns the vehicle? Does a motor pool or a fleet as an internal service fund own them and set aside money? So if PD needs a new police car, all they have to do is, we tell them that this year you need to replace X, Y, and Z, and the money's set aside already. Right now, the model is, oh, chief, you need a new vehicle, then you've got to find the $45,000 for the new police vehicle. And those become one-time hits that, put big blips in the budget. And if you need 5 vehicles this year, it's a really big year. So this levels that out by setting aside annually based on number of vehicles, cost of replacement. So if you get 5 years out of a police vehicle that's fully upfitted, you take that upfitted price and you amortize it over 5 years, you set that money aside. So at year 5, even if we're in a tough economy, the money's still there to replace the vehicle that's got to be replaced.
So it's basically looking at some long-term financial planning. And again, it's a plan that we would need to develop and lay out and bring to you for review and adoption if it works for you.
Council, any motions or further discussion on this?
Do you want to go through the balance of them first?
The other item there is to bring back information to the City Council regarding discretionary spending. And that's what we were talking about earlier, about events and, other things that the city is doing. And I think the conversation earlier, I don't know if you gave exact direction to us, but I think you really want more information on this, was what I was getting from the conversation earlier.
Please.
And then we also listed here an alternative, and there is an alternative. There's an alternative to doing any of these financial plannings, and we could just say, let's not look at the long term, let's just look at fiscal 17 and 18, and let's, cut out any new or unfrozen position, let's cut out all the one-time expenditures, let's continue to defer IT, and let's continue to defer whatever we need, so that we can balance this year, and let's worry about fiscal 19 and 20 and so on when we get to them. I do not recommend that, but that's certainly your option. You can instruct me to do that.
Well, I think the internal service fund makes sense. It makes good sense that we start planning for some of the costs before they hit. I would propose that we maybe bring that to us as well as an internal service fund.
Can I ask you a question on that? But if we're almost in a deficit situation, the expenses are showing to exceed the revenues, where would we find the money for set aside for that?
Well, we have the little bit of money in the excess over reserves, but also additionally, I will be interested to see what we find when we look at cost allocation and abatements.
Okay.
I think that that's really, for me, my #1 priority for, fiscal management for the city. When we look at that, we might have a slightly different picture. And because I think the picture might be slightly different, I'm not so terribly uncomfortable with adopting a deficit budget.
Okay.
So, it's like one of these more will be revealed sort of things.
Well, and we could start at this point developing the fund. Doesn't mean we're going to be able to fully fund the fund.
Correct.
But at least we start moving in the direction of being a little more conservative. Planning for it. Yeah.
We may develop a proposal and then just not have any way to fund it. That's correct. That could happen. We'll see. I don't anticipate. I think we'll have some seed money. Whether it will be enough, I don't know. We'll have to look at it.
Well, then I would recommend go along with both recommendations, develop the internal service fund, as well as bring back to council policy regarding discretionary spending.
Okay. And take that as a motion?
Yes.
Okay. I have a motion with Councilmember Campion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Councilmember Hewer. Any further discussion? Call for the vote, please.
Vice Mayor Payne?
Aye.
Councilmember Hewer?
Aye.
Councilmember Campion?
Aye.
Councilmember Powers? Aye. Mayor Cruz?
Aye. 5-0, you're good.
Okay, so then this is the last section, there are only 4 slides in this section. So, thank you for being so patient and bearing with us through this presentation. I know it's been a long afternoon. There's only 4 more slides to go, and one of them is a picture slide, so we'll pass that. So what we have is we have 3 lighting and landscaping districts, and the line graphs that I've given you only have 2 pieces of information on them. They have what have been the annual revenues each year in one of each of these years, and the revenues is the yellow line, and it's the bottom line. And what have been the expenses in each one of these fiscal years, expenses and transfers out. And that's the darker colored line, and it's the top line. Typically, that's not what you want. You want your revenue line to be above your expense line. So we have that situation in Fund 32. We have a similar situation in 33. We have a similar situation in 37. And there's some, there's some variances in here and some years where we had some anomalies. I think that's what I really wanted to do, because I knew we'd all be a bit exhausted by the time we got here, was I didn't want to give you more tables with numbers, but I wanted to talk to you about the overall picture for the lighting and landscaping. And the overall picture for all 3 funds is that expenses are exceeding revenues. We need to do something about that, and we are doing something about that. And if we look at the council direction slide, one of the things that I'm again recommending is that we allow the general fund to cover deficits in 17 and 18, that we complete the fiscal engineering study to determine appropriate assessment levels, and that we pursue change in assessment of levels in accordance with the study results. The alternative to doing that is that we're going to have to reduce services by either cutting, turning off some of the street lights or reducing landscaping services or something else. This fiscal engineering study is already underway. If you have questions about that, I'm sure Mr. Winkler would be happy to answer them.
Pursue changes in the assessments. Are you talking about Prop 218?
That is a Prop 218 process. Well, is it Prop 218 on assessments, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be compliant with Prop 218, but then there's also some findings you have to make on cost can't exceed your revenues.
So it seems like before we get to the alternatives, at least we're going to go through the other alternatives in terms of increasing the revenues. That's what we would recommend.
Was there
Well, the dilemma here is we've been deficit. Do we, before we give the voters a chance to support a fee increase, do we just cut services?
No, I think you have.
Or do we finish the study, demonstrate what's necessary, and then take appropriate actions? And if they say no, then we're left with the alternative.
Right.
What is the deficit? Was it that's what I mean, so why are we, can we do it faster than 2 years?
Well, actually, if we go back to, back here a ways in the general fund when we're talking about,
It's just growing.
yeah, it's,
Crazy.
where are we?
While she's looking for that.
There it is, subsidies.
Okay.
The subsidies going from 396 in 14-15 to over 300,000 or.
And when you see your budget book, you'll see the budget detail on that, and I don't recall offhand, Steve, if there are some capital items in there, if it's just all in and out.
Yeah, it's hard to me to understand how it increased that amount.
So what's going on is costs are increasing, revenues cannot on 2 of the 3 lighting districts. The 3rd district is the newest district that does get some COLAs that are tied to the CPI, but it's also where all the new growth is going. So that one actually, there's light at the end of the tunnel as these new subdivisions that are being entitled as we speak and all the new building permits, they're gonna float that ship. But the others are built out and are sort of stuck in time without any annual increases, and costs just keep going up. Right now we're using fund balance within each district to offset that or balance that. What's happening in these 2 years is we run out of reserves, and therefore all the difference becomes a subsidy.
So the difference is because we ran out of reserves that we had previously? Because, I mean, it's really hard for me to understand how you go from 54,000 to 319,000 in 1 year, and we haven't had increased costs like that.
And so why does it go down in year 2? I mean, the subsidy is still there, it's huge, over $250,000. Some of that is the study that we've undertaken. We've got to pay the consultants to tell us how to fix it. And so there's some first-year costs in that.
Oh, okay. And again, I could have given you, like, the tables with the personnel and M&O and money capital, and I just selected not to include those in here. The detail on the cost and these funds will be in your budget binder when you get that with the full budget, so you'll be able to see how costs are trending every year. What they include.
Question was asked, well, why would you want to wait 2 years with these kind of deficits? And the answer is, our hope is to bring this back likely in a study session, probably in about 5 months or so, maybe 6, so that we collect these through the property tax assessments, through the county tax rolls, and we're not going to have it done in time for the August cutoff, so we can't fix year 1. The goal would be to bring it back and have time for a Prop 218 process to get it on for the next August so that we don't lose the second year. But because we're in a 2-year budget, we can't, it would be imprudent to presume, we haven't even come up with what the rate increase should be, much less whether the voters will support it. And it is a general ballot issue, meaning it's not a majority protest, it's an affirmative ballot back. And so it's asking people to pay more to keep the same services, and those are typically tougher sells.
And you said you will give us a breakdown as to where the money is being spent in L&L. To go to the electricity, to the water, to the...
Your budget book will have personnel and M&O and that detail in it when you get your budget document.
One of the things I really noticed going around the community is some of our lighting and landscape areas, the roads, the median strips between the roads and everything. Everything's looking very, not quite as well taken care of. I mean, the bark's not being replaced, the weeds seem to be more. I just seems like lately I've noticed that it just doesn't seem. Have we cut services? It just really seems to be that's not.
Have Armando answer that. Address that.
In last year's budget process, we cut trimming to L&L 33 to 1 time a year. The weeds are a different issue that we're currently dealing with. Our contractor now, he has been more proactive over the last 3 to 4 weeks, but that's been with much prodding and.
So you noticed it too.
Oh no, we're on top of it, and it's not like we're going, oh no, it looks great. No, I'm our supervisor behind me and we're both honestly embarrassed of the way that the city looks at this time, and we apologize for it, but we are trying to work with the contractor to remedy the situation.
Well, no, I'm glad to hear that, because it was like, there's some ground and looking very good.
We're seeing the same thing in streets and ditches and roadsides. Of course, in a drought, you don't get too much weeds. Now we're back in a normal year, and it's like all those seeds have been waiting for some rain, and so here they come. So, not defending the contractor, but they took these contracts and been right-sized to sort of drought conditions. Now we've actually had a wet winter. There's weeds everywhere.
Thank you.
So basically, I think what we're doing here also is asking the council to allow us to prepare a budget document where the fiscal 17, fiscal 18 deficits and the L&Ls that are covered by the general fund, and of course that document comes to you for approval. And then also, I know that you're in support of the engineering study, or I believe you are. I wasn't here when it was undertaken, so I would assume that you are. And in support of us continuing with that study and bring it to you. Were you going to say something, Gene?
I make a motion to go with staff's recommendation.
Motion by Councilmember Campion, second by Councilmember Hewer. Any further discussion? Call for the vote, please.
Vice Mayor Payne? Aye. Councilmember Hewer?
Aye.
Councilmember Campion?
Aye.
Councilmember Powers? Aye. Mayor Cruz?
Aye. Vote is 5-0. Thank you.
So I would just like to thank you for your time this afternoon and your willingness to sit through a lot of dense financial data. I appreciate it. And I look forward to having the opportunity to bring some of this other information and fiscal analysis back to you.
Thank you, Emily.
I want to thank you because you did a great job. I think you made it a lot more understandable with all the slideshows and stuff. Before, you know, sometimes you think about the budget, you go, oh boy, we gotta go in there. And I know we'll be doing that the next time, but you at least gave us a leg up on what we need to be looking for. You did a great job.
Well, and I think it makes the community a
Yeah.
better chance to understand
Right.
it too. Than when we're just given a bunch of documents.
Right.
I really appreciate that.
I actually wish that we had more community here tonight. So then, will we be publicizing the next phase of this budget so that we will have more public input?
Yeah, the session is being recorded, so it'll be played back so the community can take a look at it. The next budget meeting will be June 7th, to take a look at the budget document and capital improvement plan. And definitely encourage the public to be out, and we'll do the typical noticing requirements. Please let your community groups know that is the time we'll be talking about budget.
And also, I'll post on social media that this meeting will be replayed on Wednesday, May 11th at 6 p.m. and Thursday, May 12th at 9 p.m. So I'll put the word out there so people can view it.
Is it time to put it in our newsletter, or is it not?
No, the newsletter goes out July 1st.
Okay.
All right, any further comments from staff or from council?
Just thank you, council, for your time today and bearing with us going through these numbers. But it's, you know, real important for us to get that policy direction. We thank you. And
Okay,
thank staff.
council, anything? Nope. And this meeting is adjourned.